Chapter 11 of Abby Lost at Sea. Abby! She could hear Luke's voice and feel him shaking her shoulder. Abby tried to flip over and pull the covers up, but there weren't any. Sitting up, she rubbed her eyes and yawned. "What time is it?" she asked. "I don't know, but the sun's getting low in the sky and we best get to." Luke rubbed his tummy, which bulged out more than Abby had ever seen it before. She wearily rose from the sand and brushed off her stiff dress, thinking how much she'd like a hot bath and her own bed, even the narrow bunk she and Sarah had shared on the ship. Will I ever see her again? The question made Abby tear up, so she hid her face from Luke and bent to retrieve the basket Nalani had given her for their trip to Lahaina. "We better hurry. Nalani says it's not a good idea to be on the Lahaina streets at night." Luke glanced at the western horizon. "I'd say we have a couple of hours then. Let's get going." They headed back toward the village and stopped for a drink at the creek. Abby showed Luke the path Nalani had pointed out to her. "We just stay on the path along the coast and we'll be there soon." Trees along the dirt path kept the cool ocean trade winds from reaching them. Sweat trickled down Abby's face in the tropical heat. "I'm tempted to tear these long sleeves off," she muttered to no one in particular. "Why don't you ask Nalani to loan you one of her dresses?" Luke teased. Abby's face was already flushed. There was no more room for a blush. Very funny. For your information, I thought her native dress was lovely. In fact, it's sensible in this horrid heat. Her eyebrows drew together as Luke hooted. "Oh, sure," he said. "It's lovely, especially her unusual hemline." Abby ignored Luke and concentrated on the surrounding scenery. The air held the sweet scent of plumeria. Here and there she saw papaya trees and low bushes with large red hibiscus flowers. But soon her legs grew weary and her feet began to ache. When they reached a clearing, she wandered to the edge of a small cliff where the ocean surged against lava rocks below. Sitting down, she grabbed from the basket a jar of water Nalani had given them and took a sip. "Luke can go on without me," she thought. She didn't care for his attitude anyway. She felt tired, grumpy, rumpled, and hot. She was lost on an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean without a way back to her parents. This was not the time for him to get sassy. He should know better. "Come on, Abby," Luke called from behind her. "Don't take all day. What are you doing, drawing a picture?" She would not turn around. Truth was, her legs were too tired from walking. They'd only been on the trail 45 minutes or so, but she was exhausted clean through. Luke usually understood that. Abby finally stood. "I'm coming." Her voice sounded irritated, she realized, as she put the jar away and trudged back to the dirt path with its warm, moist air. "Let me take the basket," Luke offered, reaching for it. "Now let's get." Another half an hour and Abby's ankles and feet began to go numb. Somehow they seemed to have a mind of their own, and they apparently liked tripping. She'd already fallen twice, bruising the palms of her hands. Finally, in frustration, she sat on a fallen log. "I've got to rest, Luke." He'd understand, she knew. He always had. "No, we haven't got time to sit around. This is one time I have to push you, Ab," he said, drawing close to her. "Come on." Her mouth dropped open, and new beads of sweat appeared on her upper lip. Never in her life had Luke been so insensitive. "What? Well, if you want me to press on so all fired bad, go get me a horse." "Don't act like a stupid girl. Nalani's the one who told you to hurry." "Oh, well, I'm sure sorry I let you sleep then. If I'd known you were going to act like a pig-headed boy, I wouldn't have." She crossed her arms and showed him her back. Luke let out a frustrated growl and sat on the nearby shoulder. "Never thought I'd see the day," he murmured loud enough for Abby to hear. "I never thought I would either," she thought back. She was furious at his unkind attitude. "You're rude and hard-hearted and—" She bit her lip and glared toward the sea. When Luke stayed quiet, Abby took a peek at him. He sat with his shoulders hunched, head in his hands, looking utterly dejected. He sighed deeply and looked up. Their eyes locked, hers angry and stormy, his wet and full of some deep sadness. "Don't you see, Ab? It's all my fault you're here. If I hadn't stowed away, you wouldn't have been in the skiff during the storm. You'd be with your ma and pa now. It's my fault. They're probably grieving their hearts out. They think you're dead." Tears streaked out of the corner of one eye. It was the first time she'd ever seen Luke cry. She got up and came toward him. "It's not your fault, Luke. I'd do it all over again so you could live with us in Hawaii." She patted his back gently. "Thanks for worrying about Ma and Pa. I've been worried too." Long bottled up tears spilled down her cheeks too. She knew part of her sadness came from sheer exhaustion. She just couldn't walk as far as most people. She was physically limited, and it hurt her to face that fact. Luke gripped her hand and urged her to sit next to him. His arm came around her shoulder. "We're a fine pair of blubbering babies, aren't we?" Her face brightened. "No, just best friends." He hugged her. "Best friends on their way home." Abby bent down and retrieved a thin stick. Winding her hair into a coil at the nape of her neck, she stuck the stick through it. "There, that should be cooler. I'm rested now, Luke. Let's get to Lahaina and the sailors past her." "Give me a second." He rummaged in the basket, taking out a little wooden bowl covered with a red cloth. "I could eat again. What's in here?" he asked as he removed the cloth. Abby bit her lip. "Nalani packed your favorite, poi." Grimacing, Luke placed the bowl on the rock. "She's a thoughtful girl, but maybe some nearby beast is starving. Let's leave it right here just to be nice." Abby's laughter rang out as the two started down the path and the sun dipped below the horizon. Abby and Luke walked slowly in the darkening gloom. Tree roots seemed to lunge up out of the pathway, tripping Abby often. Luke grabbed her twice before she went down again. As their path drew them along the ocean, they stopped to watch the silver-tipped waves break on the shore. The air was balmy. When the moon emerged above the horizon, it cut a shining path over the Black Sea toward them. On the beach, sea crabs scuttled up and down the sand, scavenging for food. "Look, Ab," Luke said, pointing down the curve of the bay. "I can see the lights of the town up ahead. We ought to be there pretty soon." Abby followed the direction of his finger. "Great, let's go." "That's the way," Luke said. Half an hour later, the two found themselves on the outskirts of Lahaina. Palm, mango, and plumeria trees grew thickly around the many fish ponds and watered gardens of the town. Low stone walls bordered crops. "Look," Luke indicated a stream running across their path. "There must be a freshwater spring up in the hills behind the town. They're using it to water their crops." Abby could see the moonlight reflecting on the surface of the many ponds and wetlands. Luke stepped up on a thick rock wall. "Let's walk on this stone pathway," he suggested. "We'll keep our feet dry." He helped Abby up onto it. The rock fence brought them to the edge of Lahaina. Even before they entered the town, they could hear piano music escaping through the open doors of the grog shops on the street that fronted the ocean. Rowdy sailors congregated on the wooden walkway before the shops and the saloons. Whale oil street lamps gave light to walk by as Abby and Luke gingerly made their way down Front Street, as the signpost claimed. To their right, the ocean continued to sweep toward the storefronts, but the waves only pounded in frustration against the rock seawall. Abby had the impression the ocean wanted to surge in and wipe away all the loud, gambling sailors from the quaint seaport. She and Abby walked with their shoulders touching as they moved down the street, away from the saloons and close to the seawall. Out in the bay, a fleet of whaling ships was anchored, awaiting the return of their rowdy crewmen. "So this is Lahaina," Abby said. Luke brushed his hair off his sweaty forehead to catch the cool trade winds blowing off the water. "Yep, we're entering the whaling capital of the world. Not hard to believe by the look of all those ships out there." Abby's eyes raced ahead of her as she read the signs of other establishments on Front Street. The Mercantile, Wonton's Chinese Apothecary, the Cooperage, where barrels were made, the Tucker's Sail Repairs, but by far all shops were outnumbered 2-to-1 by the many saloons with descriptive names, such as the Scotchman's Lair, or the Rum Barrel, or the Grog and Gambling. As the two passed each one, they could hear the tinkling of glasses and sometimes angry voices. Just as they neared the end of the street, which was taking them toward a large inn fronting the harbor, 2 burly men crashed through the doors of one grog shop, landing on the dirt street right in front of Abby and Luke. The fall to earth didn't even slow the 2 men as they rolled to their feet and circled each other with raised fist. Luke took hold of Abby's hand, moving himself ahead of her slightly as they watched the unfolding drama with open mouths. "Ye had it coming, ye yellow-bellied snake. No one calls me mother a name and lives to tell about it." The angry sailor stood in the dirt street with his booted feet wide apart and his shirt sleeves rolled up high, revealing massive biceps. He jabbed with his right, catching the taller man on the chin. Abby shuddered at the sound of fist crashing into jawbone. The taller man twirled when the blow caught him, but returned to catch his assailant on the black-bearded chin. Again and again the 2 fists collided with each opponent's face until several minutes later the tall, thin man lay sprawled in the street, apparently unable to rise for any more punishment. The muscle-bound sailor in the tight shirt sleeve stood above him and grabbed a shock of the man's hair. Slipping his dagger from its sheath, he held it to the fallen man's throat. "Take back what ye said, or I'll slice your throat like my morning papaya." Almost unconscious, the other man murmured, "I take it back, jackal." The victor sheathed his knife, dropped the man's head back into the street, and began to walk away. Abby's hands unclenched as relief poured through her. But suddenly, Jackal pivoted and stomped back to the fallen sailor. He brought back his booted foot and kicked it forcefully into the man's side. "That'll help you remember me in the morning," he said with a wicked laugh. Abby gasped at the sight, and only then did he look in her direction. Luke stepped in front of Abby to shield her as the victorious sailor stalked toward them. His wild black hair had come loose from the thong that had tied it back. As he opened his mouth to speak, his black beard jutted forward. "What be you looking at?" Jackal growled, his pointed incisor teeth looking menacing, like fangs. "Nothing, sir," Luke said quickly. The sailor eyed them up and down with disgust. "Then shut your hanging traps and be off," he yelled. Luke's eyes filled with fear as he pulled Abby along, and they hurried away from the scene. Behind them, they could hear the sailor's harsh laughter. Goosebumps rose up Abby's arms as she and Luke rushed along Front Street toward the little harbor up ahead. For as long as she lived, she'd never forget the sound of Jackal's vicious cackle. When they passed the last shop and street lamp, Abby spoke up for the first time since witnessing the fight. "I've never seen anything like that, Luke. Never seen anyone who looked so cruel. He was just like that famous pirate, Blackbeard." Luke's nose wrinkled in disgust. "He wasn't exactly the ladies' welcoming committee, was he?" Abby tried to shake off her feelings of unease. Nalani said the little white church was on the other side of the harbor. "There it is," Luke said. In the shadows of a tall banyan tree stood a little church with a small steeple and narrow steps leading up to the front door. As they neared it, they could see that the door stood open. Luke still gripped Abby's hands. "Let's see if the sailor's pastor is in." Still unnerved by the wild man she would always think of as Blackbeard, Abby almost whimpered, "Let's hope the pastor's here. This town surely needs one." And that's the end of chapter 11 of Abby Lost at Sea.